Hello and welcome to our 30th Help Save Our World Speak online speakers meeting. I'm Dennis, the teacher of this personal and world transforming quest for the truth. The topic for the next hour will be part 2 of many parts on thought. Let's begin with introductions. Kurt,
Well, I'm Kurt. I'm here to participate in a conversation about thought, which then changes conversations.
excellent. Alex,
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm also here to join part of the conversation and help change the world together.
excellent. Brendan,
Hi, I'm Brendan. I'm here to also be part of the conversation and to be part of the team that changes the world.
thank you so much, Brendan. So let's begin. The week before last, I updated you on where we were up to on this quest. Then I explained a brief history of thought, the brief development of institutionalization of thought and behavior, the importance of the pillars of thought on which institutions stand, the importance of finding alternative thought predispositions, those pillars of thought, changing them, we can change the world. Then I gave you examples of commonly used hate speak or hate speech, which is really disturbing. Then finally, the distraction and deception of things like the American dream. Before we begin, I would like to ask you a few questions, and could you please answer them in the chat? Don't you wish you knew somebody alive today in this world who would tell you the honest, unbiased truth? Yes or no? Thank you. Don't you wish you knew somebody who cares more about you and all life on earth than anything else? Yes or no? I'm getting a lot of yeses. Don't you wish you knew somebody who is fearlessly honest because they care about you and the world? Yes or no? Excellent. Thank you. Don't you wish you knew somebody who was willing to put themselves out there, no matter what, in the face of criticism and hate and everything, for your sake and for the sake of all life on earth? Yes or no? Don't you wish you knew someone who is willing to face extreme criticism just to help and guide you to become your greatest future potential? Yes or no? Excellent. Thank you so much. Finally, would you be willing to stand by that person and support them throughout that storm? Yes or no? Excellent. I ask you these questions as we enter the storm. Now, hold on to your seats because your world is going to be shaken. Continuing where we left off on our thought journey last week, you have been conditioned and told what to think, say, and do. Things like, to be successful in life, you have to get an education, a degree, a master's, and a doctorate, and then you need to get a good job. Work your whole life, buy a whole lot of things. And if you do well and you save and invest your money and pay into UIF, unemployment fund, taxes, 401k, and other retirement funds, you can retire comfortably and then spend your last days in comfort and luxury. Just think about that. If you work your whole life in the system, you can look forward to the last 10 years of your life. Where we all should know that's seldom true, because life and other things happen, and the likelihood of receiving money back from the government after that period of time is very slim. Then retirement age just goes up, and the amount of money you receive becomes less and less. You might have noticed recently, everything costs more. Food is more expensive, rents have become astronomically expensive, and your salary doesn't keep up with these increased costs of living, nor does your pension. Hopefully, you'll wake up soon and realize that this system is unsustainable and you're being lied to. Because if you don't, you will suffer more and more extreme consequences and eventually die like a slow-boiled frog that didn't jump. Thinking, questioning, finding the truth, and finding another way to live your life sustainably, then choosing that way, focusing on it, learning how to do it, and practicing it until you're living it is fundamental to your survival and all of our futures. You should be aware enough and able to see that the extremely wealthy owners are becoming astronomically rich, while the middle and lower classes are becoming smaller numbers, poorer, as the extremely poor people are growing in numbers. And you might have noticed that the worldwide economies are collapsing. The people of the world are being financially manipulated through money into poverty, subservience, and slavery. You might have noticed that police violence is becoming more militaristic and extreme, especially against the poor minorities who are battling to survive. The number of wars and conflicts around the world are increasing astronomically. People were driven into cities to become laborers to power the Industrial Revolution. And the education system was designed to prepare them for that. And of course, to prepare them for being part of that war machine, which plunders the rest of the world. And the education system has changed very little since then. As we know, institutions don't change or adapt very easily. Now, the technological revolution has distracted the majority of us with the promise of work, business, and money, keeping us constantly distracted from living our lives. We are constantly stressed out and unhealthy, striving to survive, having to adapt and learn new programs and new platforms, or trying to drum up more business to be able to pay the costs of staying in business and paying for our staff. This system, as we can see, even with COVID-19, is unsustainable. Most people will never attain the promised success of having your own business and making money while you sleep. Our once life-sustaining planet cannot sustain our way of life anymore and is showing signs of collapse. Ecosystems are in collapse, and our current education system is not preparing you for the future you will have to face and live in. Technology can be a great transition tool for accessing information, for being online to give you security so people can see what's happening, to be able to respond to any situation you're in. It can be a great tool for promoting what you're doing. And it can also be a source of funding for your transition from this unsustainable city way of life to a life where you grow your own food, have your own food and water security, and live on the land, creating a more natural way of life and moving away from our destructive, consumer-based, death-based society of the past. Chopping down trees to make things so that you can buy them with the money that you made from your labor. That is a death-based system. It's a system that converts living systems into dead things for consumption. So if we now take ourselves out of the cities and we're focusing on sowing and regenerating life and creating living ecosystems around us, we're now creating a future. But the trick is, or the problem is getting from the city onto the land needs a system to help you transition. And technology can be a very useful tool to get you there. As we know, many people are online like we are right now, and they are creating systems to help them be able to work from home or to enable them to work from home. So this is a rare and priceless opportunity. So ideally, we will use this well. And you should be able to clearly see that our Help Save Our World teachings are preparing you for the change and transformation into the future where you can live and thrive. It does this by guiding you through these thought journeys, leading you to the truth and natural wisdom which you need to learn and begin to live by if you want a future at all. If we don't change the way we think and live in the world, we don't have a future, because thought drives our behavior. And of course, that manifests the world around us. However, we can talk forever, but real change will only happen if you, yes, you, choose to listen, learn, adapt, and change as soon as you can. Chasing technology continuously is not going to save you and our world. Have you ever wondered why no one can and will tell you the truth, or tell you the negative consequences of living your way of life within that pyramid scheme? Or what is happening to our world because of that thoughtless way of life? Well, that's because if the truth were told, the pyramids would fold, collapsing like a house of cards, because they're all built upon unnatural, abstract ideas, lies, and deception. And they have to keep up the lies, or else they'll collapse, like many civilizations have throughout history. Like I said, hold on to your chairs. Your world is about to be shaken. I will deal with some of the principles and the alternatives from different perspectives, and hopefully one works with you after everyone else has had a turn to talk. So, anybody got some interesting ideas? Want to put some input on those ideas?
Good morning.
Hello, Lorna.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Great inspiration, Dennis. Thank you.
I love your little flowers behind you on the cupboard there.
Oh,
Very, very cute.
yes. Change the scenery a little bit today. No, I'm very enthusiastic about what's happening and how finally, this what's going on have pushed people to look into themselves and to take if not ownership totally yet, but they are doing entrepreneurship really by force.
Mhm.
But yet, like you said, it's just a question, right? Questioning themselves, trying to figure it out on their own, because this sweet and sour way they were pushed to be in that condition. What I mean is, all the lay off and the firing, from their jobs, right? It's a good contrast, that being appreciated, that they're doing what they think is best on their own. So I think this momentum is really grand, and besides the bonus that comes to be with the family, etc., etc. I think we have been waiting, for some shift, huge shift, and this is a kind of like a great shortcut. That's the way I see it. Because people have talked about this rat race for so long, right? And I guess that was like the opening door, at least for those that were ready to listen, about the rat race, and less is more than more is less is better than more, and all that kind of context. Doing more is not necessarily better than doing less, but doing with quality and ownership and deliver. So I think this is so historic, and I think we should be celebrating, as a group, because it's a big thing. I know it came with some consequences, the people that are gone, due to this, and there's a price for everything. Many people that have passed away, and that they have how can I say this? The people that pay the consequences with their lives, right? They have, in a very odd way, put the path, for the people that were staying, so this awakening can take place. Because certainly not all this losing people and friends and family, have touched, deeply people, but at the same time, it's what we need. I was thinking, I never have lived through wars, a war, but other predicaments, yes, depends where you live. But this also make me believe to be more understanding of people that have gone through wars, in particular, or big, big, big disasters, to understand a bit more compassionate. Even though I consider myself compassionate, but you have taken to another layer to understand the insights of people, why sometimes they act certain way. Because we cannot know, or I could not know until I am in a bigger predicament. So it's so many things, so many things. So I think this is good. I love the fact that put it in a different, title, how much, and I wrote this down, how much of information entrepreneurship have rise, which is, the personal branding, which I'm so happy about. So this is good, and I am glad to be living in these times of so much that we expected, that was good for mankind and myself. And it's a privilege to witness and do something about it. And so far, that's what I have to say. But I have more. I'm hooked today.
Okay, cool. That's wonderful. All right, Kurt, Alex, anybody?
I'm just listening today.
We're never
So-
just listening. We're forming thoughts upon everything that we hear.
Very true.
And maybe you'll share those thoughts a little later.
Yeah, very true.
But I get you, Alex, and I understand. So just to take off of what Lorna just said, I think that the concept that she ended with, that it's a privilege to live in these times and to do something about it, is critical to a way of thought, let's say, or a thought paradigm. And as I listen and learn from Lorna over the weeks, I kind of get that how she is putting together her world and certainly the world that we share and live under similar circumstances and experience. It's a very positive outlook on how we can turn things. And from that perspective, as we're going into maybe the topic of thought, it's again a thought paradigm. It's a context in which we can operate so that we don't have to get caught up with the circumstances of life as we are experiencing from day to day. In reality, whatever that means, this is just stuff that's happening, right? And we can engage with it, we can worry about it, we can fuss about it, we can stay hooked to the news about it continually if that's what we want to do. And certainly that then gives up our power to circumstances rather than, as Lorna was just doing, let me take those circumstances and turn them into something that works for me, that helps create the world that I want to live in. And it's not that this is not the world that we don't want to live in. As she said, it's a privilege to live in these times, regardless of the circumstances going on. So I think that's a very powerful perspective for all of us as we put together the meaning of all the circumstances in our life. How it comes together and what we produce is really based on the patterns that we have in our head, which was earlier part of the topic. So are we going to look at things positively? Are we going to look at things as end of the world? Look at things as a change is coming? And there are millions, I'm sure, perspectives on this planet, if not billions, one for everybody, of how we're piecing together our experience of life. So I think it's a great topic to look at rather than, and even help save our world is a similar thought pattern that we're holding on to as a group here. Each one of those words, help save our world, is a context in its own.
Yes.
Helping, saving, our as a collective and the world as a concept that we somehow agree with, but don't really know exactly what it is. However, we're looking to operate within that umbrella of thought, at least for these calls, and hopefully in our lives on some level, that we all do it differently. So just paying attention to what we say, how we perceive things, how we interpret things, and then process them, and then turn them into beliefs, and then we operate out of those beliefs, and we forget, how did I come up with that? And why am I doing what I'm doing here? And ultimately, it is a process of paying attention to our thoughts, listening to our thoughts, first of all, which many times we don't. Even when we speak, we don't, for the most part. It just kind of comes out. So as we go through this process of honing who we are in the world and how we're being in the world, our thoughts are obviously critical to creating what's next for us, both in this moment and as I take this moment and observe it and process it and then come into the next moment. So I'm glad for these conversations that open up various ways that people approach living our lives in this moment. So that's my thought on that for now.
Excellent. That's wonderful stuff. It's actually a really interesting. While you were speaking there, of course, I love the whole idea of having a positive perspective on change and where we can head, and this being this incredible opportunity. And I think, first of all, of awakening for people, as Lorna was saying, and then what we choose to do next will determine our future. And what comes through in the back of my mind are a few things. Is first of all, when we created that Help Save Our World concept, we also were about help sow, S-O-W, not in sowing with the needle, but help sow the seeds of thought and of life to grow a better future. So that was the thought process behind that as well. So the next thing that comes to mind is there's been this incredible movement towards the centralization of power, which is the pyramid schemes that stand on all of these values and beliefs, which we're talking about, which we've been schooled and indoctrinated into believing. And that resulted in us people moving from the land and centralizing in cities, creating these unsustainable systems, which produced an immense amount of technology and wealth and all that sort of thing. But it all came at a cost. Now we've been given these tools of technology, which we can now use not as industrial tools so much, but so we have these tools of knowledge availability and finding things out and accessing all sorts of things as we need it. So that's become a powerful tool. But if we just focus on it just becoming businesses and we spend our lives behind these computers all day, we lose our humanity and our lives to creating little pyramids, because that's what we're doing. And then, of course, all of those pyramids monopolized together becomes a huge, big centralized pyramid, which is about the centralization of power. But if we take it that one step further and say, okay, this is a helpful tool for us to empower ourselves in living systems on the land, then we've transitioned from living in centralized cities, centralization, to living on the land and empowering life and nature to survive and thrive and empowering ourselves. Now we've used it as a tool to transition and to add to our ability to survive and transition. That's the perfect method of doing it. But if you're just going to be stuck behind a computer screen all your whole life, it's going to harm you. It's going to hurt you. We've got to not let our tools become our master. We need to be the master of the tools and use them to the extent we need them, and then still live our lives. Because life is about living for me. It's not about being stuck behind a computer screen all day. And I find myself doing it more and more to try and get to the world where I'm free to live. So I just thought I'd bring those up because those are critically important points to me. Brendan or Lorna, anybody?
I have something here. I wrote a poem, okay, about this, metaphorically speaking. 2 Saturdays ago, it was a very dark beginning of the day that felt like it was like 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. here in South Florida. And of course, I compared that with, what's going on. I just throw you this before I read it, okay? So I call it gray, the color of the day today. Yes, still the day is crying out loud, but this time pouring with more ease and grace. Trees, flowers, ducks, and ponds are being bathed. Light thunderstorms announcing far away. Can you hear me now? I'm here to stay. Lucky me, in this gray, even Camelot may show up. Let's wear black. Gray is the color of the day. The time is now to love all the shades of gray again. Yes, it looks it will be a long day. Lucky me. So let's have a rendezvous with ourselves. Yes, again.
Wow. I like the concept of the shades of gray. That to me is a magnificent thought. We have been so indoctrinated into a paradigm of absolute black and white, heaven and hell, good and evil. It's like we live in this belief system that everything is oversimplified into extremes. And
Yeah.
then science says, oh, let's think in degrees. So it's 1 degree, 2 degrees. It's a mathematically broken up concept. But this whole idea of its shades of gray, its variance, its feeling, it's moving. It's like this incredible living expression. To me, that is magical. That's where the magic happens, in the shades. So wonderful. Thank you so much. That was beautiful.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let me just get into the nitty-gritty here. I'm like trying not to get too like intense too quickly, because I will scare the children and the animals will run away and hide. So pyramids
which am
of
I? Am I
power.
a child or an animal?
I'm the animal.
Oh, okay.
You are either.
So pyramids of power and the pillars of thought on which they stand. Pyramids of power are built upon fundamental pillars of thought, without which they would just fall like a house of cards. The fundamental premise of these male-dominated authoritarian pyramid schemes is that they are designed for the absolute centralization of wealth and power in the hands of very few. They begin by benefiting all of those within the pyramid. It's a class system. You have the upper class and a middle class and a lower class, which all gains their power from exploiting nature and others, plundering the world to centralize this wealth and power and to drive a percentage of that wealth and power right up to the top of the pyramid. However, eventually what happens is that middle class starts to be part of the wealth that gets sent up to the top of the pyramid, and it starts to shrink. And then the lower class starts to shrink. And eventually, you end up with all of the wealth and power being centralized in this small little pyramid at the top of a monolithic power-based system. And what happens is all of those people that used to be part of that pyramid all become this subjugated slave class. And this has happened around the world. The system eventually becomes a monolithic system of absolute centralization of wealth and power in the hands of those few right at the top. Throughout this process, the system becomes more and more violently oppressive, using more extreme force to maintain the extreme imbalances of wealth and power. So, stationary extreme centralization of power, centralization of civilizations, and any other form of extreme centralization is unnatural, because sustainable life requires movement, flow, constantly changing, giving and receiving, and sharing of food and land and air and water and energy. There's this constant motion in nature. There is no absolute barriers and force to make sure that one animal in the animal kingdom gets everything. There's no such thing in nature. Nature is constantly moving, flowing, and changing, and hopefully benefiting us all. This reminds me of the ongoing biggest robbery of the world of all time. We think of the great bank train robbery and the great bank robberies, and there's this thing online at the moment where they rob the gold reserves of the Bank of Spain. It's like, we think of these as big robberies. That's children playing in the park. That's not real robbery. What's happening
Hmm.
through the owner classes and their corporations and their governments and all of those systems, they are plundering the world. And that's extreme robbery. This reminds me of the biggest robbery of the world of all times by the rich and powerful owner classes, the bankers, corporations, and their controlled governments who control their people and inflict suffering upon the rest of the people of the world and all of Mother Nature. These institutionalized systems of power are the owner class's tools of power, which they use to enforce their will. Their government systems of force, power, and control use laws and police and prisons and the CIA and the FBI and military. There's no end to their systems of force and imposing their will, even education systems. To get what they want, government systems are the sticks they use to control us to get what they want. The people are also all controlled by their institutionalized thought and mind control systems like media, government propaganda, education, the sciences and technology, and religions. Most of these institutionalized pyramid schemes are built and stand upon similar pillars of thought and values and beliefs like absolute authoritarian rule. There can be only one. Where in nature the importance of the distribution of energy and power is obvious. Centralization of wealth and power is not sustainable in natural systems. Absolutism, black and white, good and evil, heaven and hell, you're either with us or you're against us. Everything is thought of in extremes, as I explained to Lorna about shades of gray. This is an oversimplified logic, which is not true in the natural world. Fear of scarcity. They know that while they keep us constantly striving in fear of scarcity and in need, they control and own us and keep us working for survival and fighting their wars. Allegiance. These institutions require blind belief, patriotism, unquestioning support for, and subservience to their power. Elitism. The belief that this group or gang of people is special and entitled to take whatever they want without any consequences. But they dare not do that within their pyramid, because if they're caught stealing or doing anything else to anyone within the pyramid, then they're in big trouble. They go to jail or whatever. The ruling classes, media, and governments constantly create issues between people to maintain segregation, fear of others, calling the others derogatory names like they're terrorists, socialists, communists. These institutions are maintained and controlled with all sorts of abstract ideas, lies, and deception. I will deal with more of them as we go, but I think this is enough right now. It's important to realize that these systems are authoritarian dictatorships. There can be only one absolute dictator in this system of absolute power. Although we are not told how many pyramids make up the whole pyramid, many smaller pyramids with similar values and beliefs make up that whole main pyramid. And those could be businesses and institutions like education and media and corporations. They all ultimately amount to this massive pyramid. And that's not just on a country level. There is this continuous movement to the absolute centralization of power. However, if you're watching carefully, you will see we're heading towards that final state of absolute centralized control. And we can see this with what is happening now around the world. There are wars happening between different power bases, different religions, and different groups of people. And there's a huge power struggle happening right now between the heads of power. Like Bill Gates is taking on the governments of the world to try and control this whole epidemic response. He is taking this self-proclaimed position of power and knowledge that he is the one to turn to, and is willing to take on the governments of the world. The people in power will not take it lying down. So we're heading for a huge amount of conflict as pyramids of power compete for the diminishing resources around the world and the dominance over one another. Because ultimately this whole system is designed for absolute domination. And that's that concept of one world government with one supreme leader. It's just something to bear in mind. I can remember when I started my journey, I said, and the impending conflict in the Middle East, knowing that that was going to happen, because it was obviously going to happen. And now I'm predicting that this escalation in conflict for the last remains of whatever's available and the absolute centralization of power is going to become ugly. It's important to understand that extreme imbalances are impossible to sustain in natural systems. Nature will always tend to return to balance or homeostasis. We know that within our body, we know that within ecosystems. This is one of the foundations of life and sustainable existence. That's why continuous growth pyramid schemes rise and fall. They create imbalances and then they collapse. And we are getting very close to that moment when it happens. Are you prepared? Have you set up an alternative, sustainable way of life? Our whole idea is to prepare you for that. Now I'll go on to propaganda and mind control. If anyone else would like to talk, now is your opportunity. Good. Do you have anything you would like to say at this point?
No, I agree with where you're heading with this, so I don't need to interrupt it. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. One of the most important things in mind control is propaganda. This reminds me of George Bush II with his "go and shop, don't worry about anything else, we'll take care of it," while the liars, the crooks, and the robbers and the murderers plundered the world in our name, and did this just to increase their ownership, money, wealth, power, and control. All of the laws that they just slipped in were just like mind-blowing. It's like, how did that happen? They don't care if there is retaliation from their excursions or wars around the world for what they have done. In fact, they encourage it and even fund and supply military hardware to opposing sides at different times in the conflict to ensure there is conflict. Because the more extreme the conflict, the more excuses they have to justify going to war. They can spin any event into their favor. So they are perceived as the good guys, fighting the good fight for God and country, to make their invasions of foreign countries seem legitimate for whatever their concocted justifications, just to get what they want. Patriotism is this incredibly powerful tool of power. You're indoctrinated into being patriotic as if it is a good thing to do, when in reality it's horrendous. It is the most undesirable thing to do. It creates a perceived separation between you and the others. Patriotism is based on extreme segregation, divide and rule, divide and conquer. It's all about irrationally separating people in one country from others in another country, or one culture against another culture, or one sect against another. You're either with us or you're against us. Segregation is that separation. And it is the unnatural separation of people because of a perceived us and them, turning you irrationally against others. These are some of the irrational barriers that make extreme wealth and power possible. This and other principles like it. I think of this as just like market entrance barriers, like protectionist laws, trademarks, copywriting, systems to prevent others from sharing in the economic wealth. In nature, if a tree has bananas on it, everyone's welcome to come and take as much as you need and eat it. But you always leave some behind for everyone else. Or you eat one fruit or whatever and you cast the seeds to ensure that there's a future. So there's a continuous maintenance of we together are in this living system and need to perpetuate it. Whereas segregation is about separating so that there can be the centralization of wealth and power. They are systems to prevent others sharing in that economic wealth. When these abstract concepts or barriers do not exist in natural systems, you can see that the system is upheld by abstract ideas. This is not reality. This is, I'm going to create an abstract idea. We're going to create this separation, which in reality doesn't exist in nature. Like private property ownership. This is one of the big pillars of thought, where we all know that nobody can own their mother. We just get to be one with the land and to live our lives with all of our living relationships while we are here. Our relationship to the land, to nature, to one another. It's about oneness. It's about connectivity. It's not about separation. The abstract insanity of private property ownership results in countries, farms, cities, property ownership, plots of land, subdivided plots of land, subdivided buildings into flats. The abstract division of land and walls, borders, and fences, all to ensure enforced labor and subjugation of people, because they have to get jobs to make the money and to pay off and to buy these houses, which is like a millstone around your neck. For your whole life, you're striving to pay off this 25-year or 20-year bond to acquire this piece of land, which you never really own, because you have to pay taxes on it and you get fined if you're not maintaining it. And oh my gosh, and if you don't pay those things, they take your land. So, and most of the time, while you supposedly are the owner, the banks own the land, and you are just paying with your life and your energy to be the perceived owner of that land. But just don't pay them for a few months. And what happens? They take back the land and life happens. You more than likely are going to end up in a situation where you cannot afford to pay, and it could be an economic collapse. It could be anything or any reason. You get sick, you end up in hospital, and you're not able to pay, and bam, you've lost everything, all of that energy and effort you've put in up until that point. Borders are a natural man-made construct designed to separate you from others and from the rest of the world. The principle of segregation creates divisive imbalances which go directly against the laws of nature and its natural wisdom. which is we are all one. We are all connected. We share the same air. We drink the same water. We are all one life force on this living planet. One of the methods of maintaining power and control is to destroy relationships between people and nature by dividing and segregating. These are enforced with documentation like passports and dompasses in South Africa, which is black people had to have these dompasses, which are their passports, so that they could come into white areas. Insanity. Birth certificates, immigration laws, all abstractly enforced barriers to freedom of movement. Who's to say that you own that land, that I can't just make a raft, jump on it, and sail across to America and live there as much as I want, and then create another sailboat or whatever and sail across to some island? Who says you own that land? It's an abstract idea. It's a belief. It's not real. So they all abstract enforced barriers to freedom of movement. It's all about control and power. You know, if we keep a small population in America and we keep the majority of people out of America, then we can have a wealthy civilization. And then, of course, if we plunder everything from everywhere else and turn them into third world countries, we can use them as labor resources and everything just to maintain that wealth within the borders of America. Now that's cruel and just unacceptable behavior, but it's what's happening right now to so many countries around the world. And many of those countries are actually wealthy countries. Like South Africa had the greatest mineral wealth in the world at the end of the apartheid government. And since then, huge corporations have come in and plundered our natural resources and all sorts of privatization and all that sort of thing. So the wealth is actually coming from us to America, and yet we have a devalued currency that makes our ability to live in this country very, very poor, and it makes it cheap for Western countries to literally rob us of our mineral wealth, which is insane. We are the rich people, and you are making yourself rich at our expense. It's like, really, there's something wrong with this picture. That's only possible because of segregation. Because if we could all just go and live where we want, there would be this equalization of wealth and power. So there's another set of values and beliefs which are very particular to America and are also very divisive. They divide us by use of sikkim. Now, sikkim is something that you say to your dog to go and bite somebody. But the actual mnemonic is specialization, individualism, competition, capitalism, and exceptionalism. Now, specialization is what we're encouraged to do. You know, you've got to get your doctorate in whatever, something specialized. It's like testing in the education system is going to be my thesis in my doctorate. So you become a specialist in testing. But you're not looking at the whole big picture of education. You really are a specialist in testing. And I know this as the thesis of one of the people who used to live in their old block of flats where we lived, up in Empangeni. And when you become a specialist, you lose that ability to be a Renaissance man, somebody who has multiple skills and knowledge and is adaptable and is resilient in times of change. Specialization with many species of life has led to extinction. Like if one species only eats a particular type of food and that particular plant gets a disease or dies out, that species is extinct. Bam. And the same goes for humans. If we are not adaptable, we will not survive. And our modern education system it drives us towards specialization. It's taken away our adaptability and our creative abilities. We need to create an education system that's expansive, that teaches us how to live in the real world. Individualism. We're so busy fighting to be the best and to be, faster and stronger and we're so focused on being individuals that we're not focusing on the most important factor, and that is that it is in our relationships, it's in our coming together that we grow and thrive the best. Competition. We're so busy competing with one another to look better, to be thinner, drive a faster car, and whatever. To do all of these things, we're competing to get the highest grades in school. It's like the whole system is designed to actually drive us apart because we're so busy competing with one another for success that we're not building our relationships. When one person succeeds, the rest of the people, all right, are less or feel inferior or get depressed or haven't succeeded. It's like, it's a pretty harsh way of thinking. I actually stopped playing any competitive games with my family many, many years ago because every time I won, I was hurting everyone around me. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just go and play on the beach where we all occupying ourselves with ludic behavior. It's just like, let's play, blah, 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 and we're all having fun together. Why have competition be the main focus of what our society is about? I think it's a huge mistake in our education system. Capitalism. Capitalism is about literally converting living systems into dead things for consumption to acquire capital, which is literally an abstract idea. Money is not real, it's just a belief. And then exceptionalism, to have the biggest car, the tallest building, I am the best and I'm famous. Really? What happens to people like that? If you think about their climb to fame, they have to really slave extremely hard to reach this pinnacle, like the top of their mountain. And they're there for a short period of time and boom, they're off the mountain and they fall down the other side and then they're super depressed. And it's like exceptionalism is such a short-term thing, and all of that effort to be superior and to be better and to be, the best at the expense of all of nature, really, because for you to do that requires a huge input from everyone else. You're standing on top of other people's shoulders to achieve what you achieve. That's, to me, those values and beliefs are failure. And it's all really fundamentally about segregation. It's about dividing us and keeping us focused on being divided. While we are distracted, fighting to be the best, they control us. And we're not growing our relationships with one another and nature, empowering ourselves and our communities by growing sustainable, independent, living ecosystems together, so we remain dependent on them while we strive to stand all over one another. What are we teaching our children? I'm just going to go a little bit further. Extremely rich people can only remain rich if they use these barriers, force, and violence to sustain those imbalances. Many of these unnatural barriers, separation or segregation, do not exist in reality. Yes, there are continents, islands, oceans, mountain ranges, and rivers, none of which are absolute barriers to our movement in our connected world. In reality, we all live on one planet. We're all one family of life, expressions of one worldwide ecosystem living now, together, at this moment in time and space on Mother Earth. Now, is that not precious? I mean, if you think of the concept of being here at this moment of this time, in this movement of spinning planet, flying through space, what are the odds that we would exist here together, you and me, yes, all of us, be here right now at this moment together? It's mind-blowingly like impossible, but it's possible. We are here. Is that not precious? One person having more than anyone else is not success. It's failure. It's greed. It's selfishness. It's inconsiderate. When we could grow an abundant world, if we changed how we think and live in our world. Segregation is a foundation on which hate speak is grown. The term hate speak was used by George Orwell in his book 1984. I also highlighted its use by everyday people in everyday life in our last meeting on thought. There are many forms of bigotry. And I'll get into bigotry, and I think that's maybe for another meeting.
Yeah.
All right, the floor's open.
I just want to acknowledge you for a well put together sequence of thought that leads us to the question of, so then, what are we up to and what are we going to do about it? I think you've listed the I don't want to use the word problems because they're just things, but the existence of current existence of civilization. So
anyone have anything else they would like to say?
I just want to say you just raised the bar so beautifully, and the contents, I mean, it's just amazing.